The radar screen glows in the darkness. A small blip appears over the Pacific Ocean. Thousands of miles from the American mainland, a U.S. aircraft carrier cuts through the waves. Fighter jets sit on the deck, engines humming, ready to launch within minutes. Somewhere else, in the deserts of the Middle East, a drone circles quietly above a patch of land no larger than a city block. Across the globe, in a frozen corner of Europe, a line of military transport aircraft prepares to take off before sunrise. Different continents, different missions, but all connected by the same invisible web. If you looked at the right map, you would see it. A map filled with dots, hundreds of them. Bases, runways, radar stations, listening posts, spread across nearly every region on Earth. And together, they reveal something extraordinary: the true scale of America's global military power. Because the United States doesn't just defend its borders, it projects power across oceans, continents, and time zones. But how did this system emerge? Why does the United States maintain military bases in so many parts of the world? And what does this vast network reveal about how modern global power actually works? To understand that, we have to go back to a time when America had almost none of it. Before the global map existed, before the network, before the world's most powerful military machine stretched across the planet. At the beginning of the 20th century, the United States was powerful, but geographically distant. Two oceans protected it. Europe was across the Atlantic. Asia was across the Pacific. Most Americans believed those oceans were enough. The country had a strong military, but it was largely focused on defending the homeland. There were a few overseas possessions, places like Guam and the Philippines, but nothing resembling the global infrastructure we see today. Then came World War II, and everything changed. In 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor shattered the illusion of geographic safety. For the first time, Americans realized something terrifying. Distance no longer guaranteed security. Enemies could cross oceans. Airplanes could strike thousands of miles away. The war that followed forced the United States to build something unprecedented: a worldwide network of logistics. Airfields appeared across the Pacific Islands. Naval bases spread from Hawaii to Australia. Supply routes stretched across oceans. To defeat the Axis powers, the United States had to learn how to fight everywhere. And when the war ended in 1945, something unexpected happened. Instead of dismantling this global infrastructure, America kept it, because a new conflict was already beginning: the Cold War. The Soviet Union had emerged from World War II as a superpower. Two ideologies now faced each other across the globe: communism versus capitalism, East versus West, and both sides understood something critical. Future wars might not be fought only on national borders. They could erupt anywhere: Europe, Asia, the Middle East. So the United States began building something historians now call the global basing system. Air bases in Germany, naval bases in Japan, radar installations in Alaska, listening posts across Europe. The goal was simple, but ambitious: be everywhere, or at least close enough to respond quickly. By the 1950s and 1960s, the network had expanded dramatically. American bombers could take off from Europe and reach Soviet territory within hours. Aircraft carriers patrolled oceans like mobile air bases. Strategic bombers sat on runways, ready to launch within minutes if nuclear war ever began. The map of U.S. military presence was growing. And it was not just about war, it was about deterrence. The idea that power, visible power, could prevent conflict before it started. But what exactly does that map look like today? If you open a global map showing U.S. military installations, the pattern is striking. More than 700 military bases across dozens of countries. Some are massive installations housing tens of thousands of troops. Others are tiny radar stations or drone launch sites. Some are permanent, others are temporary. But together they form one of the most complex logistical networks ever created. Look at Europe. American forces are stationed in Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, Poland, and several other NATO countries. These bases support aircraft, missile defense systems, intelligence operations, and rapid troop deployments. They exist partly because of one central strategic calculation: Russia. Even after the Cold War ended, NATO maintained a forward presence in Europe. And when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, that network suddenly became more important than ever. American aircraft and equipment began moving across Europe at remarkable speed, because the infrastructure was already there. Now shift your eyes to the Pacific. The pattern becomes even more intense. Japan hosts some of the largest U.S. military installations outside the United States. Okinawa alone houses tens of thousands of American troops. South Korea hosts another major concentration. Further south, there are facilities in Guam, Australia, and the Philippines. Together, they form a defensive arc across the Western Pacific. And at the center of the strategic picture is one country: China. Over the last 2 decades, China's military has expanded rapidly. Its navy is now the largest in the world by number of ships. Its missile systems can target U.S. bases across the region. And its ambitions in places like the South China Sea and Taiwan have raised serious concerns in Washington. So the United States has responded with something familiar: more access, more logistics, more alliances. Not necessarily huge new bases, but flexible. Airstrips, ports, supply depots, places where forces can move quickly if tensions escalate. Because modern military power is not just about weapons, it is about speed. The ability to move troops, aircraft, and supplies anywhere in the world faster than your adversary. And this is where America's global network becomes truly unique. Consider the role of aircraft carriers. A U.S. carrier strike group is essentially a floating military base. It carries dozens of fighter jets, radar systems, missile defense, escort ships. Together, they create a mobile power projection platform capable of launching operations almost anywhere on Earth. But even carriers rely on the global network. They need ports for maintenance, fuel depots, airfields for support aircraft. The map matters, because without it, the system breaks down. One of the clearest examples of this network in action happened during the Gulf War in 1991. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, the United States faced a massive logistical challenge. It had to move hundreds of thousands of troops and enormous quantities of equipment to the Middle East, and it had to do it quickly. The operation became known as Desert Shield. Within months, American forces flowed into Saudi Arabia. Transport aircraft flew non-stop missions. Ships crossed the Atlantic and Indian Oceans carrying tanks, vehicles, and ammunition. Many of these operations depended on existing bases and partnerships, airfields in Europe, supply hubs across the region. The network allowed the United States to build one of the largest military coalitions since World War II, and when the air war began in January 1991, American aircraft were already positioned across multiple bases. That logistical advantage helped lead to a rapid victory. Another powerful example came decades later. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, the United States launched military operations in Afghanistan, a landlocked country surrounded by mountains, thousands of miles from American territory. Yet within weeks, U.S. forces were conducting operations there. Special forces units entered the country. Bombers flew missions from bases across the Indian Ocean and the Middle East. Intelligence networks activated across several continents. Without the global basing system, such a rapid response would have been nearly impossible. But this enormous network also raises complicated questions. Because American bases are not just military installations, they are political symbols. In some countries, they represent security and alliance. In others, they provoke protests and debate about sovereignty. Places like Okinawa have seen decades of tension between local communities and the presence of U.S. troops. In the Middle East, American bases have sometimes become targets for militant groups. The network provides power, but it also creates friction. And in recent years, global geopolitics has begun shifting again. Russia is more aggressive. China is more powerful. New technologies are changing warfare. Long-range missiles can now threaten fixed bases. Cyber attacks can disrupt logistics networks. Even satellites, which guide navigation and communication, are becoming strategic targets. The map is evolving. Some analysts argue the United States must make its military presence more flexible. Smaller bases, distributed forces, mobile systems that are harder to target. Others argue that strong forward presence is still essential to deter conflict. The debate is ongoing, but one thing remains clear. No other country has built anything like this system, not even close. China is expanding its overseas presence, building bases in places like Djibouti, and developing port access agreements across the Indo-Pacific. Russia maintains several military facilities abroad, but neither comes close to the scale of the American network. Because that network is not just about bases, it is about alliances. NATO in Europe, security partnerships in Asia, defense agreements in the Middle East. The map of American military power is also a map of diplomatic relationships. Each dot represents cooperation, negotiation, shared interests, and sometimes shared fears. Which brings us back to that original image, the map. At first glance, it looks like a simple collection of locations, but look closer. Those dots connect continents. They shape global strategy. They allow aircraft to refuel halfway around the world. They allow ships to dock in distant oceans. They allow soldiers to arrive before a crisis spirals out of control. It is a system built slowly, over decades, forged in world wars, expanded during the Cold War, adapted after terrorism reshaped global security, and now, tested again by rising great power competition. Because the real story of that map is not just about where the bases are, it is about what they represent. The ability of one nation to operate on a truly global scale, to respond to events thousands of miles away, to shape the balance of power across entire regions. And history has shown something again and again. Sometimes the fate of wars, alliances, and even entire countries can hinge on whether forces arrive in time, which means that somewhere right now, on a runway in Europe, on a carrier in the Pacific, or on a remote airstrip in the desert, engines are already running, waiting, because the map is never static, and the next crisis could appear anywhere.